Okay, so I think we'll make a start. So hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us today. Today, the Imperial Lifecycle Network is very happy to be able to present Professor Sarah McLaren from Massey University in New Zealand, who'll be giving her presentation on nutritional lifecycle assessment. Before I hand over to Sarah, just a few quick words about the network, the seminar series in general. My name is Dr. Jasmine Cooper, and I will be chairing a session today. Just need to get that out there. So the seminar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be made available after the seminar, and the slides will also be made available through our website. As the session is being recorded, please mute your microphones and also please try to switch off your camera. Professor Sarah McLaren is joining us from New Zealand, so we need to make sure the internet connection is good there. There will be questions. There will all be the opportunity for Q&A at the end of Professor McLaren's presentation. And if you do have any questions, please type these into the chat. So a little bit about the network for anyone who's new. The Imperial Lifecycle Network is a network based at Imperial, which aims to bring together the research and researchers who focus in the area of lifecycle thinking, bring them together, as well as with the wider lifecycle community. The aim of the network is to foster and grow collaborations and to generate new ideas. If you're interested in learning more about the network, visit our website. You can follow us on Twitter, and for any UK-based lifecycle practitioners, you can join the Lifecycle Community UK group on LinkedIn. So today's seminar is the latest in our seminar series, and I think it's either the 10th or the 11th seminar that we've had the honor of hosting. It's an example of our more recent seminars. Recordings and prep slides for all our past seminars are available through our website, so please do check that out. And moving on to today's presenter. So today, the Imperial Lifecycle Network is very happy to be able to present Professor Sarah McLaren from Massey University in New Zealand. He'll be giving her talk titled Nutritional Lifecycle Assessment, Setting a New Research Agenda. So Professor McLaren is the director of the New Zealand Lifecycle Management Centre and professor in lifecycle management at Massey University in New Zealand. Her research focuses on development and application of lifecycle assessment and related approaches, such as planetary boundaries, industrial ecology, and the circular economy. Sarah has promoted the uptake of lifecycle management in New Zealand as a founding committee member of the Lifecycle Association of New Zealand and member of the Technical Advisory Group of the Australian Environmental Product Declaration Programme. She has served on the Office of the Prime Minister Chief Science Advisor's Rethinking Plastics Panel, Ministry for the Environment's Planetary Boundaries New Zealand Advisory Board, and represented New Zealand on the ISO's Water Footprint Working Group. She works with organizations such as the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, FAO, Building Research Association of New Zealand, and the Bioeconomy Research Centre Ireland, and the New Zealand Food Awards to translate lifecycle management into practical action. And with that, Sarah, I will somehow figure out how to stop sharing screen and hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in your seminar series. It's great to be able to join you. It's 9 p.m. in my evening, so forgive me if I don't seem quite as full of energy as the rest of you. I'll just share my screen. Is that looking okay, Jasmine?
Yep, looks good. We can see that.
Great. Okay, thank you. Right. Okay, the place I want to start today is actually with planetary boundaries, which I guess is a concept that's familiar to some of you. And it's represented by this diagram that was originally published in 2009 by an international group of scientists led by Johan Rockström, and then republished. Well, it was updated and republished in 2015. And it puts forward the idea that there are 9 planetary boundaries that we need to stay within if the Earth system is to remain in a stable state, the kind of stable state we've had over the Holocene last few thousand years. And those planetary boundaries are around the outside of this diagram. And the idea is that we need to be in the center, in the safe operating space, that green area. The yellow zone of uncertainty, and if we exceed those, then we exceed the carrying capacity for the Earth system, and there's a high risk of destabilizing it and possibly tipping it into a state where the Earth system is not so conducive to the survival of the human species. As you can see from this diagram, we have exceeded the boundaries for a number of those thresholds, and are into the red area for some of them. So what does that mean? That basically means that business as usual going forward is not an option. We need to start doing things differently. And that has led, thinking about food systems, that's led for calls around the world from international bodies for a transformation of food systems. So the idea is that incremental change, gradual improvement, more efficiency isn't enough. We need to actually do something that's a bit more radical to transform our food systems to enable us to live within planetary boundaries. And in order to work out which direction we should be going in, we need to come up with alternatives, and we need to be able to assess those alternatives for their ability to enable us to live within the Earth system boundaries. Okay, and that I'm particularly talking about food systems because food systems use about 70% of our fresh water that's withdrawn by human activities. Agriculture uses about 38% of the global land surface, and food systems use about 1/3 of our total energy requirements in global economic systems, and emit between 1/4 and 1/3 of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. So indeed, food systems are an appropriate focus for our attention. So the other reason that food systems should be a focus for our attention are some facts that are listed here to do with nutrition. Nearly 811 million people suffer from chronic hunger in the world. At the same time, the global prevalence of obesity has increased from 13%, sorry, it's increased to 13%. And also 39% of adults are overweight. Micronutrient deficiencies are common in various countries around the globe. And thinking about the affordability of food, more than 3 billion people can't afford a healthy diet. And the cheapest diets are those which provide enough energy for our needs, but not so much the nutrients that we need. So a healthy diet is 2 to 5 times more expensive than a energy sufficient diet. And on top of that, projecting forward, there are going to be about 2 billion more people in the world by 2050. So there is certainly a challenge in front of us, and that's the context in which I am talking about a new body of research we can move into today. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of a history of Nutritional LCA, where we've got to come from and got to with it. And then I'll run through 2 case studies, one on avocados in New Zealand, because I've been working on that recently. And the other one is a study in Finland on a novel protein source. And then I'll move on to the third part of my talk, which is looking at the kind of research themes that emerge from those from the case studies and the work that we've been doing on nutritional LCA. Okay, so for me, this work really started back in 2021 when I got involved with an FAO project, which brought together 30 researchers in nutritional and life cycle assessment to look at whether nutrition could be, or how it could be integrated into life cycle assessment studies. And we met together a number of times in 2021, and that led to this document, which is really a kind of summary of the state of the art in nutritional life cycle assessment, and identifies a number of research topics that need to be worked on. And that really that work came out of recognition that in terms of the functions of food, nutritional value is probably, if anything, the most fundamental or obligatory function of food. But food also obviously has other eat food. It has important socio-cultural functions. So we'll go out and have a meal with friends. And if any of you have moved to live in other countries, you'll know about the importance of certain foods from your home country in terms of making you feel closer to your culture that you've grown up in. And of course, food systems are important for many people as a source of income and employment. Given that kind of multifunctional aspect of food, we decided to define a nutritional life cycle assessment in this way. It's an LCA study where the provision of nutrients is considered as either the main function or one of the main functions of a food item. So just to clarify, in this report, we just focused on life cycle assessment of food items. We didn't kind of look at upscaling that to look at meals or diets, although that's a research area we identified as being important for future. Okay, so this is where you're choosing to do an LCA study, where you're seeing the provision of nutrients as a main function of the food. Okay, now I won't go into all the details, but I just want to give you a flavour of the work, and that's shown on this diagram here. So basically, the chapters deal with the different stages of life cycle assessment, which are shown along the top. First of all, as I said, we decided to focus on food items. Then what we said is that if you're interested in nutritional aspects, you can define that in your functional unit. So 100 grams of protein or a certain amount of calcium or whatever. You can define it to be measured at impact assessment. And if you're measuring it at impact assessment, so you might have a functional unit of a portion of food, a serving of a particular food. And then if you're assessing nutritional value at impact assessment, then you can either do that as a special impact assessment category for nutritional value, or you can go on down the cause effect chain and look at the impacts on human health, for example, using DALYs, disability adjusted life years, and I'll come back to that. And then the last point I just wanted to highlight is that we said that you shouldn't be comparing foods which have completely different functions. So, for example, spinach and ice cream or something like that, where there's no common function being provided. Okay, so I said we identified a number of research priorities, and I listed them here, but I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm going to highlight one in each of these slides. So for methodological issues, an example of one is how many nutrients are you going to measure that are associated with your food item or your diet or whatever that you're looking at? Is there an optimal number? And also, you can think of nutrients as most nutrients are nutrients that you want, nutrients to encourage, but there are some nutrients which are nutrients that you want to limit. So they're commonly sodium and saturated fats and what's the other ones? Sodium, saturated fats, and I've forgotten what the other one was. Oh yes, added sugars. Yeah. So you can measure all of those, or you can just measure one, right? But what we've said is that you should be, if you're only measuring a limited number, then as part of your functional unit, say, then you should list as many others as you possibly can, as you have information on, as well as additional information or effectively inventory indicators. Thinking about methodology issues that require extension beyond current methodological framework, there is a question here, just picking out one, about whether you include so-called non-nutrients and anti-nutritional compounds. So for example, of non-nutrients, you have fiber, which is obviously important in the diet, although it's not actually a nutrient. And anti-nutritional compounds are substances like tannins or oxalic acid that actually inhibit the ability of the body to extract nutritional value from your food that you're eating. And then third set of priorities are to do with communication, data issues, and guidance on how to use nutritional LCA. And a really key example here is when you're looking at less developed countries, is there's often a real shortage of data. So how do you deal with providing support for decision making when you just don't have very much data available, and what can we do in order to support data collection for less developed countries? Okay, so that was the kind of the history of setting this research agenda. I'm going to move on now and talk about the two case studies. So the first one is looking at avocado production in New Zealand and transport to destination, shown here. And I don't need to talk you through that because I'm sure you all know about how one would do an LCA going back to production of the fertilizers, growing the avocados, and then onward distribution. And when you do an LCA, you get the kind of results like this. So this avocados in New Zealand are grown in 3 areas: the far north, the mid north, and the Bay of Plenty. And this shows the results for greenhouse gas emissions for different types of activities. So agrochemical use on the left, fertilizers fuel, and so on. And so this shows us that the hotspots for greenhouse gas emissions are the fertilizer and soil conditioner use and the fuel use. And then, of course, we can go on and we can identify improvement options based on this knowledge that we've gained about the life cycle of avocado. So that's a production perspective for looking at the environmental impacts of avocado. If we turn it round and we use a consumption perspective, then we're looking at consumption of avocado. And when we do that, we need to ask questions about what's an appropriate functional unit, okay? And typically, we would be comparing avocado consumption with consuming some other kind of food and saying which is better from an environmental perspective. So what's the basis we use for that? Do we use a serving size, 100 grams of products? How is the product typically eaten, and should we be taking that into account? And what's the nutritional value associated with that, or with those alternatives? So what people have started doing is commonly looking at actually selecting protein as the functional unit. So this shows is an example of some kinds of results that have been produced. So this shows the carbon footprint for delivery of 100 grams of protein using different foods. So beef, lamb, cheese, and so on. Okay, so you can see that according to these data, the highest carbon footprint is for delivering 100 grams of protein via beef. If we take our avocado study, we kind of put that into that same framing of the issue, we can see that it sits somewhere being roughly the same as eggs. Okay. But then we have to ask ourselves, well, why are we eating avocado? Avocado isn't particularly known as a source of protein, and is that an appropriate basis on which to assess avocado relative to other foods? And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. Okay, the second case study that I wanted to go through with you is a case study on ovalbumin production using a called Trichoderma rhizae. And this is some work that was done in Finland. I was actually the external examiner for this, for Natasha, who's the lead author for this study. So I got to know the study and found it interesting. So what they did was to look at, they had production scale data from a pilot, and they upscaled that to industrial production, as in upscaled the data themselves, obviously, but excuse me, upscaled it and did a life cycle assessment to look at that production pathway. So the ovalbumin is a protein that is widely used in food systems to as an ingredient, in foods as an ingredient, and it can be it's usually comes from chicken eggs, but there's this alternative way of doing it using cellular agriculture. Okay, so this shows the flow diagram for producing the ovalbumin by that cellular agriculture route. What I've done is I've simplified it down just for the sake of this presentation. So the main inputs are electricity, natural gas, glucose, salt mix, and water. And then the outputs are the protein powder, and then there's waste biomass, and there's also waste water, which go to waste management. They actually did the LCA for three different countries. They did it for Finland, that's the bar on the left, Germany, Poland, and then they repeated it for Finland, but with a low carbon source of energy being used. Okay, so you can see that for some of these impact categories, so each graph is an impact category, you can see that for some of them there's quite a big difference between the countries, or the two scenarios for Finland, and that's largely due to the energy source, with quite a lot of coal being used in Germany and Poland. Okay. And you can also see, if you look across this set of results, that many of the impacts that the bars are the yellow color, and that is the glucose production, and the glucose was modelled as being produced from cornstarch. And then probably the second most contributing activity is that purple color, which is the electricity used in the process. So often the impacts that we focus on are global warming potential, that's shown up there on the left, and land use, and you can see the influence of the glucose production there, and also for water scarcity. Okay, so these results were shown for a kilogram of the ovalbumin product. But they then went on to say, well, if we're producing this new product, well, it's the same product, but using a new process, we could potentially be using it to displace the conventional way of producing ovalbumin, which is from chicken eggs. So what does it look like if we compare this new production process with the chicken egg production process? And these are the results for that. So the in the results, it's the same number of impact categories, and they just did it though for Germany and for Poland. Okay, so here the cellular agriculture TR overproduction is in columns 1 and 3 on each diagram, and the chicken egg production route for the protein powder is on columns 2 and 4. So you can see, if you look across the different results, that in general the cellular agriculture TR overproduction has lower impacts than the chicken egg production, with a few exceptions. But generally it seems to have reduced environmental impacts. If we look at the global warming, you can see that, and the land use, and there you can see the importance of the chicken feed production, and for the water scarcity. They're kind of the same, apart from for the German chicken egg production, and that's to do with the source of feed for the chickens. Okay, so I think that study is really interesting because it's situating itself in that area of transformation of food systems that I talked about earlier. And it's also, of course, an area where there is a lot of uncertainty. We don't actually have industrial systems that are operating. So we have to think about how to undertake an LCA where there's quite a lot of uncertainty, and they did Monte Carlo analysis and so on in order to look at the variability in the results. Another point which wasn't actually addressed in the paper, for those of you who are into LCA and allocation and so on, if you look at this diagram, of course, when you produce a chicken egg, it doesn't just have an egg white in it, it also has the egg yolk. And they didn't actually account for the fact that you're also producing the egg yolk in your chicken system, which you're not producing when you do your cellular agriculture to produce the ovalbumin. So the question is, what would happen if you were actually displacing your chicken egg production? What would you do to meet the demand for egg yolk if there is a demand for it? And it certainly has a number of good nutritional properties, egg yolk. Okay, so that was the second case study. I'm going to move on to the last part of the talk, and I can see I haven't got a lot of time left. So I'll move fairly quickly through this, and this is just to kind of summarize some research themes going forward. First of all, looking at modeling issues and the nutritional assessment. Obviously, a question concerns what is an appropriate functional unit. And this table shows how results or the ranking of results for climate change changes for a range of products when you choose a different functional unit. So if you choose protein or calcium, then the kilograms CO2 per quantity of each of those means that different products will be kind of better to eat if you want to reduce your carbon footprint or not, depending on which nutrient that you choose. That has really led into the idea of using nutritional indices, which assess a range of different nutrients in a product to give you the overall nutritional value. There are quite a large number of different nutritional indices that you can use. This is just some of them that are listed here. You know, that just really gives rise to the question about what is the most appropriate nutritional index to use in this kind of assessment. There's also a question about to what extent you move down that cause-effect chain. Do you just measure the nutritional value of a food product or a diet, or do you move down and look at the human health impacts? Okay, and there's been some work looking at a health nutritional index in order to do that. Moving on to the next set of factors, how do we represent variability in nutritional value? Couple of examples here. This is for different cuts of beef, and the two columns in the are for the SFA, saturated fatty acids, and total protein as a percentage of each type of cut. And you can see that they vary widely. And even if you just take, say, ground beef, you can see that if we're looking at saturated fatty acids, the bottom two, the ground beef, has both the lowest and the highest percentages. And going back to the avocado study, here are some nutrients in avocados, and an analysis was done of the early season and late season avocado, and you can see that even for that there's quite a big difference for some of the nutrients between the early and late season avocado. Another thing to think about is the target population for a food item. And this graph shows the recommended dietary intake or average daily intake for the same nutrients as I just showed you in the avocado. And these are shown for men under 70 compared with women under 70, and for pregnant and lactating women. So again, in terms of recommended dietary intakes, they can vary quite widely between men and women and different kind of stages of life. Okay, so and lastly, the set of research themes I wanted to outline is really to do with decision making and the idea that we should be extending beyond just nutritional and environmental LCA and looking at the wider aspects of food systems. And that takes us into life cycle sustainability assessment. This is an FAO graph which shows a sustainable food system framework. And I just wanted to highlight that has in it the importance of socio-economic aspects, nutrition, governance, and culture. So a lot of relevant aspects to think about to do with food systems. And finally, when we're using LCA, nLCA or nLCSA to support decision making, I think it is worth putting some more thought into how we use those assessment techniques in decision making systems, particularly when we're scaling up to support policy making, okay, as opposed to maybe detailed studies of product A versus product B. And I think it's also worth giving some thought to how the way in which you undertake those studies and presents the results can support buy-in, or actually the opposite, actually be quite confrontational in terms of comparing certain products. And finally, for us as LCA practitioners, how can we use LCA studies to support transformative change, the kind of change that's needed rather than incremental efficiency improvements? And I think that requires us to focus much more on the goal and scope and interpretation phases of LCA studies. Good. Okay, I will finish there. Just a few summarizing points, which we all know about the benefits of doing LCA. And I think in particular, what we need to do more is focus on that systems-based assessment and using what if LCA to think about transformation of systems. Think about the context, particularly if we're doing this nutritional LCA within which we're doing studies, and how we undertake studies in order to ensure relevance and buy-in among stakeholders. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. I knew there were lots of things coming up in the chat, but hopefully we can get to those in a discussion now.
Thank you.
Yep, great. Yep, so my colleague Daniel will handle the Q&A. So Daniel, do you need any help with the Q&A? I think it's like we've got a good selection of questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
we've got some questions there. Thanks, Jasmine. Thank you very much, Professor McLaren, for the really interesting talk. I'm going to just go through some of the questions we've had in the chat, just in order. One of the first questions was to do with protein availability, which you discussed a little bit later on. But they were asking specifically with regards to the avocado study that you did. I'm wondering how you defined your 100 grams of protein there from avocados. Was it before it was digested, after it was digested, that sort of thing?
Yeah, great question. So that is a really important research question, is about bioavailability of nutrients. So in that case, it was just the protein content of the avocado, but you're absolutely right. We should be looking at ideally looking at the bioavailability of different kinds of proteins as well. Yeah.
Thank you. We had another question regarding meal replacements. For example, the shakes, the powders, protein shakes as well, I guess would be relevant. But particularly the ones that claim to be nutritionally complete, and whether those had been considered in any studies, or what your opinion was on those kind of meals products.
I haven't looked into them actually, so I can't comment, but yeah, great question. Maybe someone on the line has looked into it and can tell us.
I mean, I personally have tried some of them, and they're impressive things, I guess, if they do meet their claims of, you know, a complete meal in terms of carbohydrates, protein, all the various nutrients and minerals and vitamins they claim. So yeah, it would be interesting if anyone wants to take up that study now after this talk.
But that brings up a really good point actually, because are food systems just about getting nutrients, or are they about more than that? Okay, so if they're about more than that, then maybe those kinds of products wouldn't score particularly well. If you're looking at, I don't know, people's livelihoods and the enjoyment, I don't know, enjoyment you get from them. I'm not sure you get much enjoyment from drinking one of those. Maybe you do.
That's a good point. I can't imagine everyone sitting down around their table to enjoy their pre-made powdered food.
Yeah.
Yeah, Soylent Green.
Yeah.
I have another question about the scarcity of the available data. Given the time pressure that you spoke about, obviously in that one of your first slides, in terms of the direction that we're heading in, business as usual not being enough, that scarcity of data obviously means that we can't. You need more time almost to figure out what some of the right things to do are. But are there any obvious things that we should all be doing right now, or that are like already clear from the data that you've seen?
In terms of research, or in terms of food
Well,
consumption
actually, I guess in terms of both, that in terms of what more data that you need on the one side, but also what the industry should be doing already.
Yeah, so in terms of data, the issue that was brought up already about bioavailability of nutrients is a really important one. So and yes, I mean, there is relatively little data about that. So how do you deal with that? Well, all you can do is talk about it qualitatively when you're doing studies based on the evidence that we've got. And in terms of guidance on food consumption, well, I think there are a lot of studies now that talk about livestock products, well, particularly from ruminants being an issue from an environmental perspective in the diet, particularly climate change. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, we've got lots of interest in that availability aspect that you were talking about. I think people would be interested to hear a bit more about how it's actually done, how you actually find out those things. So, for example, people mentioning here the difference between tofu for protein and meat, and also the lifetime of vegetables. The longer they've been stored, the less nutritious they become. So, I think people would be interested to hear a bit more about what you do as a researcher with regards to that availability side.
Yeah, great. Well, one of the recommendations in that FAO report that we did was that these projects should be done by nutritionists and LCA researchers together, because as LCA researchers, we generally don't have the expertise, and I certainly don't, in the kinds of issues that even you're bringing up now. And so you know, if you can get together with as LCA people with nutritionists and do studies, that would be really great.
So basically, it really needs a lot of collaboration, effectively, at this time. That's
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Yeah, continuing on like the functional unit side of things. You use protein in the avocado study. Could you talk a bit more about some of the alternatives and perhaps on the pros and cons of the various units that could be used?
Yes, so the slide I showed of the different nutrients, they were the nutrients where in a New Zealand diet, avocado is a source or a good source of that nutrient, which means it provides more than a certain percentage of the nutrient requirements. And so protein wasn't even on there because it's not a big source of protein. So arguably, it's not, as I said, it's not particularly meaningful to use protein as the basis for the nutritional LCA. But I think nutritional indices are a much better way of going about things because they're capturing information about a range of nutrients and the overall nutritional value of the product. So yeah, kind of that's I think where things are moving.
So if you were to use a nutritional index, would that allow you to compare very disparate different foods with one another? Does it sort of make it normalize it effectively so that you could compare avocado with a banana or whatever it happens to be?
Well, you could, but again, one of our recommendations has been that you shouldn't compare products that you just wouldn't choose between in a diet because there's no reason to do that. And that leads you into the kind of idea of having food categories and comparing within them, which is one way that you can go. And then you can kind of tailor it to the typical nutritional value that's provided in the diet by that particular food category. But a potential problem with that is when you look at across different countries, of course, they're not always consistent in terms of those food categories.
All right, so we just got quite a bit of a longer question in the chat, so I might just read it out to you rather than trying to digest it and tell what they're saying. So, okay. Still on the topic of the nutrient indices and asking with regards to the ones where there are disqualifying nutrients and how it's possible to set a functional unit and define suitable reference flows when the nutrient occurs in fixed ratios within any given food item. So it's no quantity of chocolate bars will deliver the same nutritional quality as an avocado. So I think you've kind of mentioned that in terms of making sure you compare the appropriate food groups. Is that what you'd say?
Yeah, but there's another issue in there which is about disqualifying nutrients. So some people think that you shouldn't include disqualifying nutrients in the calculation of your nutritional value. So what you typically do is calculate the nutritional value for the nutrients you want to encourage, and then the disqualifying, the ones you don't want, you subtract the nutritional value of those. But there's a question about whether you should do that when you're thinking about, say, a functional unit where it's providing in the kind of framework of LCA, it's providing a service, right? So it's providing something good. So why would you subtract the disqualifying nutrients is one question. And then you could think about some food items where there's maybe not much good nutritionally about them at all, but there's quite a lot of these disqualifying nutrients, and so actually you could end up with a negative value, which again doesn't really make sense in terms of the way LCA is structured. So yeah, so that's a kind of a live research question, is about how you deal with those disqualifying nutrients.
Yeah, and of course then you would have to take into account the cultural, social aspects and those sort of that area at the same time as well.
If you were doing the life cycle sustainability assessment, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like wine is a good example of that, right? Not
Yeah.
a lot of nutritional value, but big socio-cultural value. Well, in some countries.
So I have a question regarding who the target audience for these studies are. Are they for white papers? Are they going to be going directly to governments or for like legislation? Who's the target audience for the studies that you conduct?
Oh, well, because quite a lot of that work I talked about was done as part of the FAO project. FAO, the kind of context is very much about national policy making. So for countries around the world, so quite a lot of the points I was making were kind of relevant in that context. Yeah.
And on that topic as well, how do we and how do you, what is the best way to communicate the results of an nLCA, the nutritional life cycle assessment? Are there going to be labels? Should there be labels for various products and like certification about the CO2 equivalent, and like how do we relay this information to the public as well, perhaps?
I think that's a great question, and again, that's a kind of real topic for debate at the moment. You know, should we keep them separate? So you have on the labels, you keep it like it is at the moment, and then have the separate environmental information, or do we actually combine them? I don't have a answer for that. Please do some work on it and suggest something.
Yeah, I think someone's obviously, they're interested in those FAO reports that you were talking about. Are they publicly available, or are they?
Yes, that report is available if you just look up nutritional life cycle assessment in FAO. You'll be able to download it. Yep. And there was also a seminar. So when you get to the page where that is, there's also a seminar you can listen to.
Cool, thank you. I mean, I was really interested by the seasonal variability that you mentioned, and just how, yeah, the study that you can conduct if you don't use almost average values, perhaps, or even by averaging values, you could be completely misled by the findings. What do you think the best way to overcome those sort of variabilities are almost out of the researcher's control, effectively?
Yeah. Yes, I found that really interesting as well. I mean, you can show range. I mean, what we do in LCA generally is show ranges of data, and that's the way you can do with it. Or you can actually use that as a kind of stimulus to ask questions about why that's happening, what it is about the production system, and whether you can alter things in order to increase the nutritional value of your products.
I think that last aspect would be obviously very interesting to those companies that are looking to create these powdered complete food alternatives, because that's obviously the claim they're trying to make, is that they've altered the food, or they've combined the foods in such a way that they're providing you with a product that ticks all these boxes.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So another question here is, and as these questions, this conversation becomes obviously much more relevant, how do you see people's diets changing? Do you think there'll be more plant-based diets because of these kinds of findings? Do you think there may be more of these alternative food products perhaps as well?
Well, what I'd like to see is more emphasis in low and middle income countries where there are real dietary issues to do with shortages of nutrients. So if we can somehow influence that, then I think that would be a really great step forward.
So focusing on malnutrition, really, like the extreme end of it. Yeah. I
if
mean,
you want transformation.
yeah, well, that you mentioned obviously in the third slide, I think it was about the population growth over the next 30 years, and then obviously the state of it, how it is right now, hundreds of millions. So yeah, that's definitely interesting. You've got people very, very glad that that's your focus.
Thank you.
What are you working on at the moment? What are your future plans in terms of food products or extending the functional unit, data collection? What's next?
Well, I'm have been talking with FAO about a follow-up program. I'm kind of not sure exactly what's going to happen on that front, but the idea would be to kind of scale up to look more at diets. I think it would be good to focus on low income countries, and to take more of this systems-based sustainability perspective. So that's quite a big agenda, really. That's where I'd like to see it going.
Yeah. That's definitely a broad topic to be looking into.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good place to finish things. It's now 10 o'clock UK time here, and also 10 o'clock in the evening in where Sarah is. So I'd like to thank Sarah on behalf of the network and all the attendees. Thank you. It was a really interesting and important conversation that we just had. And yeah, so thanks for everyone who joined us today. Have a good rest of the day wherever you are joining us, and hopefully see you in a future seminar soon. Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Bye.